Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for stopping by. So we are going to be we're going to be discussing chapter 9 here, the judiciary chapter. So let me go ahead and share my screen so that way we can get started here. Let's see. Okay, so y'all should be able to see this. Let me go ahead and hit the slideshow here. Okay. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start with going over chapter 9 here, the judiciary. So this is going to be the last of the three major branches of Texas government that we're going to be taking a look at. And next week we'll get to local government. So, within this chapter, within the Texas Judiciary, what we're going to be taking a look at, this chapter is divided up into two parts. The first part of the chapter is going to be focusing on some of the key players within the Texas Judiciary and how the judiciary is supposed to operate, with important factors such as judges being elected in Texas, as well as also discussing a little bit about the attorney general and their role. And then the second part of the chapter is going to be taking a look at the actual Texas court system itself, in terms of the different levels of the different types of courts that we see in Texas here. So let's go and take a look at the objectives here. So by the end of this chapter, you should be able to discuss the judiciary as a political branch of government. So we are going to take a look at the importance of the judiciary within um, our American style system of government, I've also mentioned before that, just as an aside, that the American system of government, when it comes to having the separation of powers, where you separate the different branches and they have their own unique responsibilities, that are for the most part independent from each other, but sometimes they are tasked to interact with each other, like when it comes to like the lawmaking process, where um, we got the state legislature, working on legislation. They do need the governor's signature, and then of course, the courts also can step in and look at the constitutionality of laws, which is judicial review. So they do interact with each other, but for the most part, they are supposed to be kept separate. Then, of course, the checks and balances, right, where we see that the different branches are allowed to check each other when it comes to to ensure that there's not one branch that's more powerful than the other. So the reason why I say that is because the judiciary obviously has an important role within government when it comes to not just deciding cases, but also judicial review and looking at the constitutionality of laws. The point I'm trying to make is that you see this in other developed countries where a lot of the westernized world has taken the American style of government and they have incorporated um, into their government setup. So if you go like to France or Australia or stuff like that, you're gonna see a very similar type of setup, right? Where you do have three branches of government, and you'll probably see similar checks and balances, right? This is something that has become very common throughout most of the Western world. So that just goes to show you just how innovative the American style of government has been. So the reason why I mentioned all that is because we are going to take a look at the judiciary's role within government here. Describe the major players in the judicial system, including the central roles of the attorney general, the bar, and lawyers in the process. So, like I said, we are going to be taking a look at some of those major, not just major positions like the attorney general, but also major organizations like the state bar, and also talk a little bit about how to become a lawyer, things like that. For anybody who's interested in going to law school, I think I've said to y'all before, I'm kind of interested in doing it. Um, South Texas College of Law has an online part-time program, which I think is the first in the state. So I'm definitely interested in doing that, because when I was younger, I did want to be an attorney, but it just was a little bit too expensive. So, but now that I make a little bit more money, I think it might be something I might consider doing. So, because my goal is maybe like to practice like when I retire, maybe do like some attorney work on the side, to make some extra money. So we'll see what I end up doing with that. Uh, okay. Understand the structure of the Texas court system from the lowest courts to the two Supreme Courts. So yeah, like I said, this is going to be one of the major aspects within this chapter is that we are going to be taking a look at the way the Texas court system is set up. And we're also going to take a look at how there's a lot of criticisms with the Texas court system. So we are going to be doing some more comparing and contrasting between the Texas court system and the federal court system. And as I was saying before when we were doing this, because right, the last couple of chapters, we have been doing some comparing and contrasting when we look at Texas's three branches of government compared to the federal version of three branches of government. And we mentioned that the Texas legislature is probably the closest um, when it comes to mirroring its federal counterpart, the U.S. Congress. We talked about how that procedures that the legislature takes is almost identical to what we see in Congress. I mean, they have they have a similar setup, the speaker. But of course, one of the major differences is the lieutenant governor acts as would be the counterpart to the Senate Majority Leader, right? So that's a major difference. And then, of course, with the executive branch, we've seen that the governor has some similar powers to the president, um, but the governor's a lot more limited. And of course, we have the plural executive, where in Texas, the governor does not appoint, you know, the governor does not have a cabinet, so to speak. The governor doesn't make those appointments, but instead we have um, other state executives that are elected independently. So that's another major difference. And then when we're gonna look at the Texas court system compared to the federal court system, I would say that the setup is probably the most different of the three branches when we compare Texas to the federal government, because but we'll talk about that right now in terms of why I believe that it's the most different. Um, but when it comes to the actual job of a court, they are pretty similar. So their role is similar. As a judge, it's similar. That's one similarity between Texas judges as well as federal judges, is that their job is relatively the same in terms of what they're supposed to do. However, of course, with state judges, they are responsible for, you know, they're responsible for interpreting and applying state law, and then federal judges apply, federal law. Although they can get involved in state issues because judicial review, does allow for federal judges to get involved in state issues. And things like that. Um, but we're also going to see that one of the major differences is the way the court is set up with the different levels of the courts. Like I said, we'll take a look at that here in a bit. Compare the roles of grand juries and trial juries. So we're going to take a look at the differences. Most people, when they think of juries, they tend to think of the juries that are going to decide whether someone is guilty or not guilty in a like in a criminal case, or decide whether the plaintiff, if they're suing someone, if they're going to, if they're going to win that case and receive damages from the defendant here. Uh, that's what a trial jury is, and of course, we're going to take a look at the grand jury and their role and how they tend to. Uh, what their role is and how it's different from trial juries. And then, of course, evaluate major issues in the Texas judiciary, including problems with crime, problems with judicial selection, and issues of equality in the administration of justice. So we are going to take a look at how, when we think of the judicial system, and you probably have seen that statue of, Lady Justice, right, where she's holding the scales of justice and she's got the blindfold on, because of course, obviously, the symbolism behind that is that justice is supposed to be blind, right? That it's not supposed to matter how much money you have, whether you have a prestigious career. None of that is supposed to matter when it comes to the law, right? The law is supposed to be applied equally, regardless of those factors. But is that actually happening? Ideally, we like to think that justice is blind, but we're going to look at some of these logistical issues when it comes to like equal access to attorneys. If someone can't afford attorney, yes, obviously, of course, with the Sixth Amendment right to counsel, um, people, anyone can get an attorney when if it's going to be, if you've been arrested for a somewhat serious or a very serious offense, obviously, of course, you're going to have access to an attorney. However, though, is the attorney that you're going to get, are they competent? Are they good enough to be able to provide an adequate type of legal counsel for you? We're going to take a look at some of the factors that might play into why, if why public defenders, which are the attorneys that work for the government, and then they represent people who can't afford attorneys. We're going to take a look at how the public defender system does have issues when it comes to the equal administration of justice here, right? And of course, we're also going to take a look at um, what issues play into this whole setup of electing judges. Because there's pros and cons to the different ways that judges are able to get on the bench here. So it'll be an interesting chapter. Since I do have a criminal justice background and I have been interested in wanting to go to law school and things like that, I should be able to, we should be able to have, some good discussions here, good ideas that are going to be expressed here. Okay, so that's pretty much what we're going to cover here within this chapter. Okay, so when it comes to the judiciary and democratic theory, the judiciary, of course, is defined as a collective term referring to the system of courts and its judges and other personnel. And so the judiciary, of course, right, when we think of the judiciary, obviously, of course, we think of judges because judge is as judici the word judge, obviously, of course, you see it within judiciary, not exactly, but it does flow from that. And so we're gonna, obviously, of course, when we look at the judiciary, judges are the ones who, of course, get the most attention. But there's other people who also work within the judiciary. Sometimes the general public doesn't even really realize just how many people are involved in terms of working within the judiciary system because a judge isn't going to be able to do everything by themselves, right? They need support staff, they need secretaries and clerks, they need the bailiff that provides security for the court. Courts also work very closely with law enforcement when it comes to, securing courtrooms. They also work with correctional facilities, especially when it comes to like county jail, and they have to bring defendants that have been arrested and are awaiting their arraignment, where they actually enter in a plea after they've been read the charges, and so there's a lot of work that's involved, a lot of paperwork. Many years ago, I actually used to work at the Hidalgo County Courthouse for a bit. I was a I was a clerk for one of the courts there. Um, so I was there for a bit. So I was able to try to pick up on stuff. It is interesting. It is an interesting type of job, but I was mostly just a paper pusher, so I didn't really get to see like too much of what was going on. Like it'd be different if I was like a court reporter, which I don't know if y'all have seen the court reporters make a bunch of money because they have to transcribe everything, but they got to be really fast, because everyone like they have to record everything here, so there's a reason why they make a lot of money because it's a very high skill job in life. So anyway, and of course the question asks, are judges part of the political process or not? Um, And if they are, how can they be installed in office in a manner that ensures they'll be fair and impartial, but still accountable to the public? So again, this is the big question here when it comes to deciding what is I guess you could say, the best way of setting up the judiciary, because when we look at the federal system, and I think it's going to talk about this a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Where is it? Yeah, I think it's going to talk about it. That's going to be, yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's going to be talking about it here. So when we look at the federal system of judicial selection, let's kind of recap that a bit. So the way a federal judge gets on the bench is uh, the president of the United States makes an appointment, and some of y'all may be familiar if you've taken federal government. You're probably familiar with this concept of presidential appointments and how the president makes appointments to their cabinet, as well as like ambassadors. All that's mentioned in Article 2 of the Constitution. Um, Presidents also appoint federal judges, and a lot of people like to think that, oh, like that's Supreme Court, and that is true. But the president also makes appointments when it comes to all the judges throughout the federal judiciary, whether it's the district courts or the circuit courts. Those are also appointments made by the president and also then confirmed by the Senate. So that's the way the federal judiciary selects its judges. But in Texas, judges are elected, and some of y'all may have seen some of those signs. Since we're coming up. I mean, well, not, we are in elections. We are in election season now because we actually do have early voting. Right now, as the filming of this video is occurring in late October 2024. And some of y'all may have seen that some of those signs are for judges. A lot of the signs are for judges. All kinds of courts are that there are all kinds of courts that have their election coming up next Tuesday, right? Even though early voting is going on right now. Um, So that should give you a good clue. If any of y'all have ever seen some of those signs, pay attention to some of those offices that these people are running for. You'll see that a lot of them tend to be judges. So it's something that people don't really think about too often. But you see it, like I said, it's more evident than people think because, like I said, a lot of these political signs usually are for judges. I know for the ones I've seen, I mean, of course, obviously with the presidential election, we're seeing a lot of, Trump Vance signs. We're also seeing some Harris Walz signs. But like I said, we're also seeing more of these local judgeship races. So just keep that in mind that that's the way the judges are, how they get to the bench here in Texas. Now let's talk about, and then of course this is going to delve more into this, right? So let's talk about the myth of the non-political judiciary. So when it's saying the romanticized idea of judges, this is talking about when we think of a judge, we tend to think of like, the long black ceremonial robes that the judges wear. Whenever the judge walks into the courtroom, the bailiff will say, "All rise for Honorable Judge so and so," and there's that respect that's given. Because judges are so supposed to be looked at as like arbiters of justice, and and this tradition has gone back many, many thousands of years, back into the BC era days, back to like Babylon, and even like, within like the Bible, there's also like, parables of like King Solomon and judges working under him. And uh I think there's this one, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's this one story where um there's two women and they're fighting over a child. And so the judge so then the judge hears, the issue, and then the judge says, well, like, since I really can't determine, which of you two actually is the mother, what we're going to do is we're going to cut the baby in half so that you all can have, so it could be equal, right? So you all can have half of, and then one of the women says, no, 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 like that's fine. She can have the baby, just don't hurt it. And so then the judge says, okay, you're the mother because of the fact that you love that baby so much. That proves, that you were willing even uh to give the baby up just so the baby could live. That proves that you're the mother. So I think that's from the Bible. I think I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to look that up. I'll just Google it, I guess. But that's that's kind of what, one of the like, the old school like traditional being, stories that we think of when we think of like, judges, right? They're supposed to, the arbiters of truth. They're supposed to be like, just looking at the facts, and they're supposed to be just looking at the circumstances, and they're going to use their legal judgment and their legal training, to ultimately, um, make these decisions. That's of course the romanticized idea of judges. So, but we're going to take and of course that goes into this idea of a non-political judge that is impartial and incorruptible and only focuses on the circumstances, of the case here, right? In terms of just looking at the case itself, and no other outside factors are going to come into play. Like I was saying earlier about, Lady Justice, right? That justice is supposed to be blind, and it's only supposed to be the facts and circumstances of the case, which will decide how the case is going to be decided here. And of course, also, you know, judge. Of course, also we have to keep in mind that juries also, of course, play a big role in this. Where juries are the ones who ultimately make the final decision. But keep in mind that judges do have a lot of power within their courtroom because judges can decide what is admissible, what isn't. Some of y'all probably have seen like courtroom dramas and things like that. So the judge basically kind of acts as like the referee, so to speak, where you've got the defense and the prosecution, competing against each other when it comes to the introduction of witnesses and then the cross-examination by each side. And so it's tends to be a somewhat, uh adversarial type of, when I don't mean adversarial like in a bad way, but just like it's almost like some gamesmanship, like you can kind of think of it as like a competition, so to speak, right? So that being said, that's tend to what we tend to look at in terms of like the traditional view of judges. So, but of course, we're also going to take a look at the reality, that the reality might be a little bit different than what we as society tend to think of when we think of judges, right? So in terms of judicial interpretation, judges do tend to be more political in elected systems. So the book is talking about how that because judges in states, and it's not just Texas, there are other states in the country that that elect their judges. It does come with this reality that judges in states where they do have to run for re-election, that they are going to have to be more political. Um, for sure, they're going to have to be political when it comes to getting that seat. Please give me just a moment to take a swig of water here. So when we're taking a look at this elective system here, and what are the impacts that it could have on judges? Judges really don't have a choice but to have to be political, at least while they are seeking office. And what I mean by this is that judges have to engage in the same type of practices that any other person who is seeking elective office is going to engage in. They're going to have to run a campaign. They're going to have to try to fundraise. They're going to have to, submit campaign reports and all that stuff. And they're going to have to, try to run television ads and put up political signs, right? So when it comes to the political process of trying to win that election, what they have to do is not really any different than any other elected official. Um, Now, once the election is over, and if let's say that judge ends up winning, then they're supposed to keep they're supposed to no longer be political within their job, right? Because so let me give you an example of this. Let me give you like a local government example of this. So if we look at like a position like the district clerk or the county clerk, and those are the ones, of course, handle the paperwork for district courts there. The county clerk is the one that handles the rest of the paperwork, like when it comes to like documenting birth records and death records and marriage records and all that stuff. Basically, they're basically the top record keeper of the county. That's the county clerk. District clerk is the top record keeper when it comes to the district judges, right? So that's the difference. We'll talk more about that in the next chapter, local government. But the point I'm trying to make is that these positions are elected. So the county clerk is an elected official. Now, obviously, of course, they're going to have to engage in those same types of political actions to try to to win the election. But once they get into that position, politics isn't really a part of their everyday life, right? Or it's not supposed to be part of their everyday job, right? They're basically just supposed to now work as kind of like, just any regular bureaucratic public employee, right? But then when it becomes election season, then they have to be a politician. So you see how, like, in that position, you're not really a politician within your day-to-day job, as opposed to like someone like a governor, where politics is definitely going to be part of your everyday job, not just during election season, but also within the job itself, type of thing, right? So judges have to be more like the county clerk, where they obviously, of course, have to engage in the political process, but then once they get on the bench, that's not supposed to be a factor at all. Now, we are going to talk about how is that actually happening? Is that something where do they, once they win that election and they are in that seat, do they just, forget about that stuff? Unfortunately, as it's saying here, that judges do tend to be more political, in these elective systems. But again, we're going to talk more about that in terms of like some examples here. Parties can still disagree with one another. So there was this interesting case that came out of that happened in Texas. This was in response to the 1999 abortion notification law that was passed in Texas, where this affected this was for um, teenagers who, if they wanted to get an abortion, they had to get their parents' permission in order to get one. Unless there was an exception though, because there was if one of these teenagers was able to contact a judge, and a judge was able to, you know, if they were able to convince the judge that they didn't need parental notification, or that maybe, let's say, like, maybe let's say they were living, like an example would be like, let's say they aren't living with their parents, but they're living like with, other relatives or something like that. So the judge would be able to like waive, that requirement or things like that. So there was a situation where there was uh this there was this one teenager who was trying to get an abortion, and the judge did allow for, did approve it basically. But then but then there was a lawsuit that was filed, and it went to the Texas Supreme Court. And then the Texas Supreme Court, even though they were dominated by Republicans, some of them agreed with the notification law, but then some of them agreed with what I'm trying to say is that some of them were trying to overturn the original judge's decision to approve the abortion. Well, not necessarily approve the abortion, but approve the woman to be able to have one, right? Because the reason why the judge approved it was the judge, because in the law it does say that another exception would be that if the judge feels that, the woman is, sound of mind and is knows what they're doing basically. And of course, there's all another, we're not really going to get into like the whole notion of whether something like that should even occur. I'm just explaining, just what the law in Texas was at the time here. But ultimately, the judge was satisfied with her explanation and what she was explaining about her situation. So that's why the judge signed off on it. So ultimately it got, to the Texas Supreme Court, and then some Republican, which is of course they had the Republican majority. Some of the Republican judges, like I said, they wanted to overturn the judge's decision, but the majority of the judges said no, we're not going to overturn it because according to the law, nothing is wrong here. The law does allow for judges to, to waive that to waive the the need for the parental approval. And so we're just going to go with what the law says, even though personally I'm sure those Republican judges were not in favor of abortion itself. They were probably pro-life, but they were still going by what the law said, and so that's basically in a nutshell what the abortion case was about here. So right. So continuing with this whole idea of the romanticized idea of judges, politicians in black robes bound by canons of ethics and standards of judicial procedure. Um, so again, the as I mentioned here, um, this is what we think of when we think of judges, right? That they're supposed to be above politics. They're supposed to keep politics only during, the election season, and they are supposed to focus on just the cases themselves, right? And so on a day-to-day basis, most judges would apply issues in the law the same no matter their political leanings. And again, and this makes a lot of sense because the job itself is not political, right? Like I said, being a judge, you're not really going to be engaging in political decisions on a daily basis. When it comes to like a entry level judge, like a district judge who's going to be handling murder cases, um, it's the politics of politics are not really going to enter something like that. I mean, it's obviously if it's a murder case, it might get some extra media attention. Um, but judges, when it comes to those types of everyday responsibilities, they are going to tend to look at the facts of the case here, right? But again, now there's a good video that I want for y'all to take a look at when you have time this week. It's called "Is Justice for Sale in Texas?" And even though, like I said, and the book talks about how that in terms of the actual day-to-day decisions that judges make, that usually is not political. However, it is interesting that video does talk about, and it's a little bit dated. It's from the 1980s. It's a 60 minutes video from the 1980s. Um, so I do apologize that it is an old video, but the point is that um, there are some issues when it comes to like, especially with judges, moving up the ranks, especially like in the appellate courts. But again, we'll talk more about that towards the end of the chapter here. So, okay, let's take a look at the position of the Attorney General, currently held by Ken Paxton. So is our current attorney general. So he is an independently elected executive, like again, part of the plural executive, where not appointed, but is elected by the people in a statewide election. And the attorney general is considered Texas's chief lawyer. So obviously, of course, in order to be eligible to be an attorney general, you of course have to have, you have to have legal experience. And if you want to, and of course, if you want to, how do I say it? If you want to have a good chance of being attorney general, you're definitely going to have an extensive law career, right? When it comes to being a successful attorney, probably probably also being like a former judge also would also be very helpful. Moving up the ranks of the judiciary system. Because again, if you're going to be the attorney general, you're going to be the top legal mind within the state of Texas. So again, and what we mean by being the Texas chief lawyer is that they will represent the state in court. I've said many times before that the state of Texas usually is fighting with the federal government. It happens a lot more often than people like realize, and it goes both ways, right? Like, well, Texas, might sue the federal government, and the federal government might sue Texas, and in most recent years, it's been because about the border issue as well as the the and of course, with the overturning of Roe versus Wade and the Dobbs case, of course, that also has, put some of these, states that have very strict abortion bans, and laws and things like that. That's kind of, also put them at the forefront in terms of some of these lawsuits here. So the point is that the attorney general is supposed to represent Texas whenever they are in any type of legal proceedings, things like that. The attorney general also has the power to issue what are called advisory opinions. So an advisory opinion, excuse me, give me a second. Sorry about that. An advisory opinion is when the attorney general looks at whether it's a bill that's being, whether a bill that's making its way through the Texas legislature or a law that's already been passed and then it's being challenged. The attorney general has the ability to review that legislation or potential legislation and when we look at a bill and ultimately basically act like a judge and say, yeah, no, this I would say, so the attorney general could be like, yeah, this is constitutional, so that's fine, or no, it's not constitutional, so basically, obviously, of course, the attorney general is going to have to be an expert in the Texas Constitution, which good luck to that because of course of how lengthy and how wordy and how specific it is. But that's what the attorney general can do in these advisory opinions. They look at the Texas Constitution and then they can determine whether this legislation or proposed legislation is actually, if it's congruent with the Texas Constitution, right? So that's what an advisory opinion is. Now, the reason why it's called advisory is because the opinion of the attorney general is not binding. You know how, like with the Supreme Court, they have opinions, but those opinions are binding to where they become case law. The attorney general's advisory opinion is not case law. It's just giving their advice. They're just saying, that this is what yeah, I believe it's constitutional or unconstitutional, right? So that they're giving that advice. And then the affirmative action case, this was the Hopwood versus Texas case. This was a case that came out. Um, and of course, it's interesting because it's dealing with law school because there was this one student who was denied entry into UT Austin's law school, which is very, very competitive. And the student was obviously, very upset. I wouldn't blame them for that. That's I'm sure that was their, one of their dreams, to be able to go to UT Austin Law School and ultimately, become a successful attorney. And so what the student does with this student was this is interesting because like sometimes like when I've been like turned down for jobs, like I'll try to see like, okay, I want to find out who ended up getting the job, and then I want to see like, like, okay, what are their credentials? What was it that why were they selected over me type of things. That's kind of like what this student did was the student was looking at who was admitted, and they found that that some of the students that were admitted instead of that some of the students that were admitted had lower test scores. And like when it came to like the LSAT, those standardized tests, that I'm not the test that potential law students take in order to try to get admitted into law school, which is very similar to the GRE. But the point is that so I've never taken the LSAT, but I've taken the GRE a couple of times, so I've heard that it's pretty similar. And so this student ended up filing a lawsuit saying that that they felt that they were being discriminatory because this student was white. So um, the student was making the argument that it was reverse discrimination because they had higher test scores than some other applicants who got in because they were minority. And of course at the time, UT Austin was trying to to they were trying to um, create a system where more minority students would be able to be admitted. And so, of course, the courts did step in and ruled against UT Austin, basically saying that you can't use race as a criteria for admitting someone or not admitting someone. So then, and the attorney general at the time also, he also issued an advisory opinion that also basically, um, stating that right, that race could not be a criteria for that. And so UT Austin and other law schools had to revamp their eligibility requirements to look at things more holistically. You can't just make a racial quota, so to speak. Like if, let's say we're going to admit 100 students, like half of them have to be minority, right? So it can't be a specific number, right? It has to be more holistic, right? Where you have to take other factors into consideration and things like that. So that's basically, and of course, affirmative action is the idea of trying um, to try to create more equitable opportunities for minorities because minorities have for the most part, been kept out of some of these positions and schools and, and prestigious schools and things like that. And of course, this also leads us to what we also saw recently in Texas government in this last legislative session. The DEIs, the diversity, equity, inclusion program. I think that's what DEI stands for. Those were outlawed in Texas, where colleges and universities cannot have these DEI programs. That doesn't mean that colleges and universities on their own cannot try to um, when it comes to like hire, they can't, that doesn't mean that they can't try to hire more minority candidates. It just means that it's not mandatory type of thing. So that's something that was passed recently by the Texas legislature. So that kind of also fits into what we're talking about here. Okay. So then let's talk about attorneys here really quickly. Okay, so one more thing also about the attorney general that is not mentioned here. I also want to mention that because this is also pretty important. The Attorney General's office is also responsible for overseeing the collection of child support payments. And the reason why I know this is because, when I graduated with my bachelor's in criminal justice, one of the jobs that I saw that was very available was working as one of these child support collection officers, things like that, where basically you have to go and try to, contact these to ensure that try to find some of these people who are owing child support and have them try to be able to locate them and then get that information over to like a judge so that they can then work on the wage garnishment and all that so that the child support can be paid. So that's also something that the Attorney General's office is responsible for, is overseeing the collection of child support payments in Texas here. So okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at lawyers or also attorneys, but they're basically the same thing. It's a different word, but same thing. Okay, so let's take a look at the requirements in order to become an attorney in Texas. If any of y'all are interested in becoming an attorney, this is what you have to do. So, in order to be an attorney, you have to first get admitted into a law school. Now, in order to get admitted into a law school, you have to have at least a bachelor's degree, and you also have to take the LSAT. Like I said, the LSAT is very similar to the GRE. The GRE basically is it's a test that you take where it looks at your aptitude when it comes to like logic and reasoning. So they're gonna ask a lot of these logic questions. Like I don't know if any of y'all have ever heard of questions like this where it'll be like let me see if I can think like I know what they are, but let me see if I can think of an example. Um like something like this, like oven is to pizza as blank is to ice cream, something like that. Like you have to look at like, how are these two related? And I don't know if any of y'all have heard of questions like that, but that's the type of stuff that you'll see like on these types of tests because they're trying to determine, how well you can how well you can um show logic and reason, because you're obviously going to have to do that if you're going to be studying, law here, right? So that's the type of questions that you might see like on these tests. So if you're able to get a good score on the LSAT, then of course that will open up opportunities for you to be able to attend certain law schools. Of course, they're also going to look at your undergraduate transcripts and things like that. That's why for me, I think I'll have a pretty good chance to get admitted somewhere because since I have two master's degrees and maybe I'm going to do my doctorate first. I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, so I'm sure I'll have tons of credentials, so that shouldn't be a problem. But yeah, so let's say once you get into law, once you're admitted, then of course you're going to you're going to take your law classes. So I've looked at some of these degree plans for law school, and so they include all kinds of law. They'll have like family law, criminal law, you know, and things like that. And then they'll also have like some tracks that you can go in. Like if someone wants to be like an immigration attorney, they'll have stuff like that. They also do have like criminal procedure and all those types of classes, which some of those classes I've taken, in my criminal justice courses. So it should be something that I should be, I definitely would have a leg up on someone maybe who's just fresh out of undergraduate school or things like that. But yeah, so anyway, so you're able to complete your classes. They also have, and every law program is going to be different, right? Where some of them are going to have like, capstones, and then I'm sure some of them also have the residencies where you go and do like internships and all that. So it does take several years. But once you finish all of your requirements, you are supposed to then take the state bar exam. So if you pass the state bar exam, then you are officially eligible to be an attorney in Texas. Then you have to submit an application with the Texas Supreme Court. And then once your paperwork gets filed in, and they'll do like background checks and all that stuff. And so once your paperwork gets filed in, then the Texas Supreme Court will officially certify you as, a practicing attorney in Texas. And then you have to maintain that license through like continuing education, all that stuff. I mean, that's no different than like, any type of license in Texas. I know like for high school, like for teachers also, it's a similar process where like they have to pass, their the state test, and then they receive their Texas teacher certificate, but then they have to submit documentation that they've engaged in continuing education. Because yeah, for attorneys, they definitely have to do continuing education because laws change from year to year. So they definitely have to be. It's not like they have to go to law school all over again, but they definitely have to know about the new laws that are being passed if they're going to be keeping up with um, you know, they're going to need to keep up with that, right? So, and then the Texas State Bar is an organization that is both a government agency and an influential professional association that lobbies government on behalf of its members. Now, there's one main reason for why the state bar is so incredibly influential. It's because there is a requirement that in order to be an attorney in Texas, you also have to be a member of the Texas State Bar. So every attorney in Texas that is a practicing attorney in Texas, they are all part of this of the Texas State Bar. So that's a very powerful organization, right? Because when you've got all the law experts in the state that are part of this organization, that's going to be a very powerful organization, and they definitely do throw their weight around because not just of the fact that they're so large, but also who they are comprised of, right? They're comprised of attorneys, right? So again, so it is considered a government agency because it is the organization that is responsible for, and also in conjunction with the Texas Supreme Court, this is the government agency that is responsible for setting the standards for attorneys. So they also work with the accreditation of the law schools to ensure that what the law schools are teaching, um, does meet those standards, for attorneys if they're going to be practicing in Texas and things like that. So, but yeah, it's definitely an important government agency because it does have a role in terms of ensuring that Texas attorneys are, that they know what they're supposed to know, but also it's very influential because of the fact that it's, that every attorney in Texas is a member, and of course a lot of attorneys in Texas, are, pretty wealthy and all that stuff. So, so you can tell that there's definitely going to be a lot of influence in state politics, through the Texas State Bar here. Okay. All right. So let's see. I want to see how much time we have. Okay, we got about 10 minutes left. So I want to see um okay, so I'm gonna skip around here a bit because I don't want to get into the I'm sorry, I don't want to get into going over the actual court system yet because I don't want to like just get through like a little bit of it since we have about 10 minutes left. So we're gonna come back to the court system. We will we'll take a look at that next time. And so instead, let's kind of skip over here. Let's get to police and then we'll come back to grand juries and trial juries. And then I think that should take us to to how much time we need. So okay, so let's take a look at police first, and then we'll go back. Okay, so very quickly, a discussion with the police here in Texas. Um, so let's talk about this because as we're going to see next time that there's a lot of different levels to the Texas court system. There's also different different types of police organizations within Texas. Now, the Texas Department of Public Safety. This is DPS, right? I think a lot of you all know about this agency, right? Especially if you live in South Texas, you definitely um, are going to know about them. So I there's been several times when let's say I've driven like out of Texas when I've gone I'm not out of Texas, but I've driven outside of like South Texas and I've gone to like Houston or something like that. It's so interesting that like once I get out of the valley, like um, I won't see hardly any DPS. Like like most recently when I went to Houston, I think I maybe saw one DPS trooper like in the Victoria area. Um, but as soon as I get back to South Texas, then like you see a lot of them. Of course, obviously, of course, that's based on Operation Lone Star, right? That we've talked a little about before. But anyway, but of course, the DPS troopers, of course, you all, I'm sure you're familiar with them. They are the state police. They are the ones that drive the black cars with the white hood. They also have the gold Texas emblem on the side of their vehicles. I'm sure you've seen them, right? They're not hard to miss in this part of the state. Um, Also because of Operation Lone Star, you probably will also see a lot of their cars like in some of the local hotels, right? Because that's what's going on is that a lot of these state troopers are not from here. They come from other parts of the state, but they are stationed here in order to assist with border security initiatives down here along the border, right? So you talked about that before here, right? So the state troopers here. So this is probably a little bit outdated because this was a couple of years ago, but when last checked, there was 4,164 commissioned officers within Texas DPS. So yeah, these are the state troopers. These are also the ones you've probably seen their uniforms. They've got the tan uniform. They got the cowboy hat also. I've got a couple of friends of mine who are state troopers, and I haven't talked to them in a while. But one of the things I've been meaning to ask them is that I know it's not really all that important, but I always want to ask them, hey, is do you have to wear the hat like as part of the uniform, or is that more ceremonial? Because I have seen some where they're wearing it, some of them are not. Like when I'm driving by and I see like a traffic stop, I'm seeing some of them are wearing them, some of them are not. So I'm not sure if they officially have to wear it. It's just um, you know, I'm kind of leaning towards that probably it like they don't necessarily have to. Um, it might just be something that just kind of, just to show, okay, like this is like a Texas, police officer type of thing, just kind of keeping with the tradition of cowboy hats in Texas and type of things. I mean, they do look really, really cool, and things like that. But yeah, so these, of course, are the state police. So the state police do have jurisdiction pretty much anywhere in the state, right? Because they are sworn officers at the state level. They do have jurisdiction everywhere within Texas. We also talked about in the governor's chapter that the DPS is also responsible for providing the security detail for the governor. And of course we also have the Texas Rangers, which originally the Texas Rangers were just DPS, where they weren't called DPS, they were called the Texas. So we've had the state police being the Texas Rangers for many, many years, right? Even pretty much going back to near Texas's founding. But what's changed now is that the Texas Rangers are not the everyday officers, on the ground, so to speak. Now they've become like the investigative unit of the Texas Department of Public Safety. So they kind of become like the FBI of Texas, so to speak. Okay, so that's DPS here. Now we also have sheriff's departments. Every county in Texas is going to have its own sheriff's department. Now, um, the way that the sheriff's department is supposed to work is that they're supposed to have jurisdiction outside of city limits. Because as you're also going to see, there's also local police departments. Okay, so the sheriff's department, they're supposed to handle law enforcement issues that occur outside of city limits. So if let's say you're living in the northern part of Hidalgo County, the more rural part, and let's say there's some like emergency going on, So if you call like 911, it's going to go to the Hidalgo County Sheriff's Office dispatch office, and then they'll be able to dispatch whether an officer or they can dispatch, EMS if it's a medical emergency. So depending on where if you live outside the city limits, then the signal will be able to determine where you live, and then it'll route it to which So if you call 911 anywhere, um, the towers are the radio towers are going to triangulate your position, and then it's going to be able to send you to the appropriate um dispatch center and all that. But right, so the point is that the sheriff's department is supposed to handle, crime and issues that are outside the city. And then the local police departments, these are like your city police departments. They, of course, are, they're supposed to, they respond to, they're going to respond within city limits, right? And so also keep in mind that, that police officers in general, that they don't just respond to like criminal complaints, they also respond to calls for service if like let's say I don't know, like let's say there's a an accident or something like that, right? So it's not really a criminal matter, of course, if there's other factors that in play. If they were if they engage in drunk driving, that's of course obviously then becomes a criminal matter. But if it's a simple accident and people just they just mistimed or misjudged, then the police will go out and they'll of course take the report and all that stuff. I'm sure you all have seen that. It's very routine. So that's basically how it works, right? So there's state police, there's county police, and then there's local police, and there's also subsets within there. So for like state police, it's not just DPS. You'll also have, for any of you all who like to go out to state parks, you'll see like, you'll see like the game wardens, the Texas wildlife. They have sworn officers that are supposed to enforce, state laws um, when it comes to like regulations regarding fishing or hunting. Some of y'all if some of y'all engage in some of those outdoor activities, you'll know that when you get your fishing license, there are requirements when it comes to the type of fish that you can catch, right? Like you might be familiar with this, right? That there are certain size requirements, right? That if you catch a fish that's too small, you can't keep it. You have to throw it back because that would upset they're trying to engage in the sustainable fishing, right? Where you don't want to catch one that's too young because then it hasn't had a chance to grow and to reproduce. So then that could affect the population of the fish. So they have to be very careful with that. So that's why they will go and do like inspections, right? If, they'll check you, like let's say, you know, that you're on the boat and they'll go and check your, the fish you've caught just to make sure that they are, that they are, they're up, that you're not violating any of those regulations. It's also why DPS will pull over a lot of 18 wheelers because the 18 wheelers also have certain regulations that they have to abide by, particularly when it comes to the weight of the 18 wheelers. So if let's say they're carrying the um the items and the supplies, the cargo that they're carrying, if the cargo is too heavy, that's going to cause problems with the Texas road. So that's why the DPS also is very proactive when it comes to inspecting the 18 wheelers. They also have checkpoints for that too. So there's all DPS also sets up checkpoints, for 18 wheelers, where they weigh them and to ensure that that they're not carrying too much weight. So that's another responsibility that DPS has. So yeah, so Texas Game Wardens is a subset of state police. Um, Other subsets for local police departments, it's not just city police, but we also have like, like school district police. There's also college and university police. So like SCC, UTRGV, they also have their own police forces there on campus and all that stuff. So again, there's all different types of these different types of police units across the state. There are challenges though. So overlapping jurisdictions does become an issue, especially when it comes to like like with DPS, since they have jurisdiction, not just within the city and the county, so they have both rural and city jurisdiction. But the cities and the counties are supposed to kind of have separate jurisdiction, but sometimes it's hard to like know where the lines are and things like that. And for the most part, the departments do try to have good working relationships with each other, where like if let's say, um, you're not gonna have like what I'm trying to say is like you're not going to have like SEC police going and pulling someone over like away from campus. You know what I mean? Like it's I'm not saying that they can't do that because if a crime happens in front of them, they are supposed to respond to it, but they're going to defer that to like the city police or things like that. You know what I mean? Like that they kind of try to have that jurisdiction courtesy, right? Where they're not they try to just kind of you know you know, they try to respect the line, so to speak, but sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. And in emergencies, of course, obviously they're going to respond because it's an emergency. And then complex organizational responsibilities. So, of course, this talks about how that, that in recent years, of course, we've seen a lot of controversy when it comes to policing in general. Obviously, of course, we've seen that, police have been, um, there's just been a lot of, you know, um, there's been a lot of attention that's been brought forth because of lethal use of force and whether lethal use of force should or shouldn't have been used in some of these cases, and so it does become a situation where there has been a lot of this there's been a lot of attention that's being it's being shown to to police practices, and of course there's also issues with police subculture. I've done some research on this as well, like in some of the research papers that I've written, and it's something that I still want to continue with because police subculture is something that definitely does need to be researched more, and it's definitely something, so there are a lot of modern problems with American policing, um, you know, and it's going to be difficult to see if we can find some solutions to this. But it is something that definitely does need to still be discussed. And of course, obviously, there's also controversy with Operation Lone Star itself. Um, it's definitely something that is controversial. Like some people that live along the border, they brought up issues where some people have felt that they have been like harassed by police and things like that. Because of the sheer presence of them. And the number of them. So, but it is what it is. It's something that it's still an ongoing discussion also. So, okay, so it's already going to be time to go. So we will go ahead and stop here for today. And next time we are going to cover the let me stop the share here. Next time, of course, we'll cover the Texas court system, and then we'll get to the rest of what we need to cover here. So let me go ahead and stop the record here.